we just want to welcome you. I'm Betsy John Lane, the Family Support Specialist with the North Carolina Down Syndrome Alliance. We are so beyond thrilled to have Kenzie Clark with us here tonight. Not only is she going to be joining us at our Buddy Walk coming up on October 20th as a vendor, she has been a hot topic and a hot discussion point at our conference, as well as previous virtual speaker series. And so we are here to talk all about transitions. And we just want to welcome you, and we are hosted in collaboration. We did want to give a quick shout out to all our other DSAs that work with us. Coastal Buds, Down Syndrome Network of Onslow and Carteret counties, the Down Syndrome Network of the Greater Greensboro area, Down Syndrome Association of the Greater Winston-Salem, Down Syndrome Association of Greater Charlotte area, as well as the High Country Buddy Walk. And we also want to thank you with your patience with our technology. We have been making that transition into teams, but we have had success. And we have our presenters and able to share all of this information with you tonight. We did just want to also remind you, don't forget to sign up for Buddy Walk teams or just come and join us on October 20th for our Buddy Walk. There will be some amazing vendors, as well as just a great day for family and fellowship. And we, at the end of this session with Kenzie and talking all about transitions, we will be taking questions through the chat, and we will be sending the follow-up and kind of the FAQ and questions around transitions from Kenzie after the session as well, soliciting your feedback of what needs or other things you have. So again, we just want to welcome you tonight on behalf of the NCDSA, and welcome Kenzie. We are so excited to have you. Take it away.
So much, Betsy John. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and to share tonight. So after the conference that was held in this late spring, I was asked to kind of do another version of this presentation for everybody. So tonight we're going to talk specifically about transition through the ages and phases from elementary school to leaving high school, for how to prepare, what to do, and what that looks like. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we will get started. All right, hopefully everyone's able to see my screen right now. Before we begin, I definitely want to thank and thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate that, Danielle. NCDSA for all the amazing work that they do. Definitely connect, like Betsy John said, with the Buddy Walk. Get your team ready. I'll be there and hope to see some of y'all at the Buddy Walk. So I'll tell you a little bit specifically about Able Transition and what we do, and about me a little bit. So we are an organization that provides support for individuals with disabilities, and we seek to help families and individuals build unique, comprehensive, long-term plans, as well as short-term plans to think about the future. And our vision is to see all people living high-quality lives where everyone is involved in their local community. So my background is I was a special education teacher in the public school sector, and I've taught from kindergarten to seniors, as well as at the community college level for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I have my master's degree in transition specifically. And so I am a transition specialist. I love supporting families and individuals of all ages, phases, and stages to understand what's coming up, how to prepare for the next phase, and ultimately how to prepare for a high quality long-term life. So when a lot of people ask me what transition is, if you were to go into a school or talk to your special education teacher, they might say transition is preparing for life after high school. And that is absolutely true, but it's so much more than that. Transitions happen all throughout our life. Transition really is understanding the educational pathways that are available to an individual, and moving from early childhood supports, elementary school, middle school, high school, to post-secondary life, whether that be employment, education, independent living, community engagement. And then transition is also the process of continuing to live out a life as an adult, becoming and continuing to move forward. Everyone knows that the one constant in life is change. And so we want to prepare individuals to understand the change that could be coming all throughout the life, and how to make sure that you and your loved ones are equipped for all of the transitions you will go through. So tonight, I'm not sure of the age demographics of those who are coming, but whether your child is 3 or your loved one is 4 or 18 or 25, it's important to begin thinking about transition wherever you are because of the research. So when I was in graduate school, there's a lot of really incredible research going on in the transition specific world. It's a relatively new field, meaning within the last about 12 to 15 years have we really even had master's programs and degrees and research in this area. But the research that's been coming out is showing us that the earlier we can begin to talk about transition, prepare for life after high school, talk about the availability for individuals and what we need to do, the higher life quality outcomes they're going to be. So the earlier we can talk about skills, dreams, self-determination, hopes for the future, the individuals whose life they're living are typically, and according to research, will have higher quality of life outcomes, specifically regarding social interaction, communication, friendship, employment, job retention over a period of time, levels of mental health well-being, satisfaction, and engagement in their larger community. So we want to think about transition and talk about it because there's really a big transition problem. And it's not just in North Carolina, it's really across the US as based on is what research shows us. So I'm sure a lot of you know around 80% of individuals with disabilities are unemployed, and those that are employed typically only work a few hours a week or have to have multiple jobs to figure out something that is going to be consistent. There's also the reality of limitations for accessing funds through employment because of Social Security. So there's a lot of things at play there. Many individuals throughout the US, not only North Carolina, do not have long-term housing options or accessible housing that is high quality, where you would want someone that you love to live and have a full life in. Schools aren't providing the necessary transition resources and information, and this is not in part due to the special education teachers, because I was one of them. They're doing the best they can. They're working really hard, but the majority of it comes down to education and continuing education to understanding a lot about transition. The next is that there are huge long waiting lists. I'm sure a lot of you know if you're on this call or if you've not heard of the innovations waiver yet, make sure you sign up. You can email any one of the NCDAS folks or me about it. But there are Medicaid waivers that are essential to paying for long-term job coaches and staffing when an individual becomes an adult. And the wait list for those funds is 14 to 15 years in North Carolina at this time. And there are similar wait lists in other states. Transition plans from a school-based perspective are not implemented to what we call fidelity, and seamless transition is not occurring. So in an ideal world, in high school, by the time an individual is between that 18 to 21, 22-year-old phase, we want to have everything set up so that the last day of high school looks like the first day post-graduation. So we want to have employment set up, education set up, knowing where they're going to be living and where their resources and supports are going to be happening. And then there aren't transition specialists in districts or within counties specifically working with families. And when we think about transition and thinking about long-term life and even moving from elementary to middle to high school, it involves so many things. It involves thinking about longer-term planning, financial planning, trust, thinking about the IEP, guardianship, transportation, housing, healthcare transitions, college, work, benefits. There's so much. It can be very overwhelming. And so that's why I'm hopefully here tonight to give you some very specific steps for how to move forward and why we exist at Able Transition to help holistically guide families through all of this information. So the first thing I want to talk about when we think about transition is the main indicator of long-term success for individuals with disabilities is if they have the ability to be self-determined. So self-determination is the number one key indicator of a high quality long-term life for an individual. So self-determination is key to begin developing and instilling in individuals, whether they are 2 or 3 or 8 or 13 now. So I'll just read this really quickly. Self-determination is the combination of skills, knowledge, and beliefs that enables a person to engage in goal-directed, self-regulated, and autonomous behavior. So really, it's the ability to believe in yourself, to understand your strengths, and to set a goal and to move forward on that goal. It can be small ways. We're going to talk about how to do that developmentally and appropriately. But when we are able to instill and teach and coach and support self-determination, we see incredible outcomes for individuals, whether that be learning to drive or living on their own or living as independently as they possibly can, to retaining job, having great friends, traveling, and more. So self-determination is key. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of move through the different phases of life. We're going to start with elementary school. We're going to move into middle and to high school and talk about what we're going to be doing at different phases and stages to support and prepare for transition. So we're going to start with elementary school. So if you have a loved one who is in elementary school, you should begin to start thinking about transition now. The research shows us that we should be thinking about it really as soon as 3, 4, and 5 years of age, because it's going to be essential to how we advocate, how we support, and what we pursue for our loved one as they get older. So as your loved one is entering elementary school or is in elementary school, I'm sure everyone knows about the IEP. We've heard about it. I'm sure you've gone to sessions and you've sat in many, many meetings. But in elementary school, the IEP really is a foundational document that should be individualized to each individual to ensure that we are starting to think about long-term early. So what I mean by that is we want to make sure we're instilling obviously foundational academic skills like basic reading, writing, math, skills that are going to last them a lifetime. And even at this age, we can begin to build in lifelong skills to their goals. And we want goals to be beneficial and important. So I'll give you all an example. When I was teaching in middle school, I had a 16-year-old student who came to me and he left elementary school and he still had an IEP goal around handwriting. Now, when an individual is 5, 6, 7, that's absolutely appropriate. We want to make sure that they are able to write and engage, but we also live in a technologically advanced world where a lot of people are texting, emailing, right? And a lot of the writing most people do nowadays is filling out forms and signing their signature and their names. So we want to make sure that when we're thinking about goals that are going to be beneficial long term, that we're able to ensure that we're giving them goals that are going to benefit them forever. As an example, a student shouldn't be 16 and in middle or high school with a goal for handwriting. I hope that makes sense. So what we want to start to think about really is academic and functional skills. So in elementary school, we really want to make sure in terms of academic goals that are going to be in the IEP that they are also functionally driven. So by that, as an example, is for functional math. We really want to make sure that they're developing understandings of money, addition, subtraction, using a calculator, cost associated, because if this individual is going to live on their own, to go grocery shopping, to go out to the store and purchase a new t-shirt or a new video game, they are going to need to be able to have these skills. Similarly, with functional reading, we want to really promote literacy, engagement, reading, answering questions. Also within reading, we want to make sure that they are reading signs, community signs, safety information, that they can go to a restaurant and order. If they're going to go take a train or go to an airport, that they're able to read and identify these important information. And if reading is not necessarily accessible, then accessibility through looking at visuals and symbols in the community, like bathroom signs, stop signs, danger, do not enter, etc. So we want to begin to think about that. And within elementary school, we want to also make sure that in the IEP and at home that there are activities of daily living and functional skills that are being taught, whether that is working with an OT on putting on their coat, buttoning up something, tying their shoelace, or even Velcroing a shoe, because that's functional as well. And we also want to really ensure that communication skills and self-advocacy skills are being taught and are being emphasized in the IEP and at school at this time. So one of the things that you'll hear me say a lot throughout tonight is, in terms of self-determination, the earliest and the best thing you can do for any child, any individual, is giving them voice and choice, giving them the ability to have their own voice and make their own choices. But obviously we need to do it appropriately. So in a school setting, it might look specifically like if they are working for a reinforcement. If they go through maybe 4 different rotations, they get something at the end, whether that is to listen to a song, to take a walk, to read a book, giving them the choice of what would you like to do? What would be the most beneficial for you? So that way they see, oh, I can make decisions based on what I want, and people are interested in what I want and in what I think. It's incredibly, incredibly huge. So within the self-determination skills and communication and self-advocacy, we want them making choices about themselves. Also within elementary school, the earlier the child can know that there's an IEP meeting happening and attend, even if it's for the first 5 minutes, to introduce themselves and to say hello, it makes a huge difference. I had a student who was 17, and I was the first teacher that had actually brought them to the IEP meeting. And they communicated to me and to their parents they wanted to be there because everyone was always getting together and talking about them, and they were never in the room. So it's really important that the individual is communicated to as is appropriate developmentally, that we are going to be talking, we're going to be meeting and talking about your education. And if you have a really great special ed teacher asking, hey, I would love for them to come introduce themselves and to talk for the first 5 minutes. We want to make sure it's appropriate, obviously, for the individual, but bringing them in and letting them know that they are an integral part to their IEP team, because it is their IEP and it is their education, is huge, even when we are in the elementary environment. In elementary school as well, another thing that's important for a long-term transition that we see as an indicator is to be promoting inclusive environments, whether that is a peers program where they meet with their general education peers, if they go to a art class or music, or they are going out for PE or recess, or sitting at a lunch table with their peers in their general education classes. Those are huge indicators of post-school success. So advocating for those and knowing that that is important is something that I want you to remember if your loved one is in the elementary school setting. Now, in elementary schools, we also want to begin to develop that self-determination of voice and choice, and to start to think and help them think about the future. There's a lot of research studies that show, unfortunately, and again, by no means of anyone, everyone's doing their best, but a lot of times there are students in elementary school who are in self-contained classrooms who aren't really talking about the future or what they want to do when they grow up. And so it's super important to advocate for that in your child's classroom, but also to do that in your home environment. And so in elementary school, we think about transition and growing up and becoming a person in society who's going to be engaging and be productive in whatever way that means for you. Career awareness is going to be essential to start in elementary school. So as you are going out into the community with your loved one, if you are at the store or you're at the doctor's office, to begin to start to talk about careers, to talk about what people are doing, to talk about work, and to talk about jobs, to ask them the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? When you're at the doctor's office, to point out the person checking people in, to talk about the doctor, what the doctor's doing, their job. At the store, this is the person that checks people out. This is their job. Do you think that would be fun for you? Even if they're 8, even if they're 9, we want to begin to expand their understanding and their awareness of careers and work and what that means. Using language of, yes, we go to work and we make money to be able to pay for fun things and food and for housing. Getting them aware is a huge first step in transition understanding and will really help prepare them longer term. In elementary school as well, it's super and developmentally appropriate and important to help them understand their strengths. So in terms of self-awareness, self-determination, and self-advocacy, individuals who understand their strengths and their abilities and what they're really awesome at are going to do really well long-term as an adult. And it can be really hard, obviously, when you're a 6-year-old to really understand what you're great at. Some kids know intuitively or will communicate that. But one of the things we really recommend to clients who have kiddos or loved ones in elementary school is to use language around their strengths. So if they have a hard time identifying them, for you to pick it out for them and to communicate it to them. For example, saying something like, oh my gosh, you are so great at helping people. When your friend was sad, you helped talk to them and made them feel better. Oh, you really helped me put our groceries away when we came inside. Thanks for listening and really helping out. Um, you know, I think it's super important to model that and to speak that back to your children or to your loved ones to help them understand what they're great at. So to teach and to model, because we want them to say, oh, I'm so great at doing X, Y, or Z. And so it's obviously not going to happen unless we speak it, teach it, and model it for them. So helping them understand their strengths, calling them out, and reminding them is huge at this age and phase. And then one of the most important things, which I tell families all the time, is at elementary school, if you are a parent or a loved one, remember to care for yourself. So many parents that we work with have loved ones who are 18, 25, 30, 40 years old. And it can be a long road and a long journey to be an advocate, a parent, a caregiver, so many things. It's incredibly challenging. And so I always recommend at this phase and stage to make sure you have people in your corner to support you, whether that's family, members, organizations like NCDSA, a great therapist, a family group that you meet with, making sure that you can build in time for yourself, even if it's a minute just to take a deep breath and to sit in your closet by yourself. Giving yourself space and time is super huge and important. And I promise is integral to the benefit of your child long term, because we want you to make sure that you are well, that you can continue to support and advocate for them long term. Now, as we're in elementary school, we're going to continue towards this self-determination by helping our loved one understand themselves. Like we said earlier, understand their strengths and abilities, what they're interested in, what their preferences are, how to set a plan, make a goal. It could be very simple to finish a coloring book, right? To put all of the blocks away. Whatever it is, teaching them and developing the self-determination. To also work on communication and taking actions. We want to do this at home in an age appropriate way. So typically for our kiddos in elementary school, we definitely recommend starting off with a couple of chores that are responsible. They could be responsible for that are skill level appropriate and age level appropriate. And a way you can do this that also ties in self-determination is by giving them an option. Hey, would you like to put the blocks away, or would you like to help me put the clothes in the dryer? And letting them make that decision and helping them understand that there are things and responsibilities that we have to do, but I'm going to give you the voice and choice to figure out which one you would prefer to do. In elementary school as well, we want to make sure that as we're thinking about long term, that you are thinking about the resources that need to be in place. So the two main resources we tell all of our clients to begin getting in place in elementary school first is getting on the wait list for the innovations waiver for your state, or it's called the 1915 community-based waiver based on states, and North Carolina's our waiver is specifically called the innovations waiver. And the second is to develop a special needs trust and to talk to an attorney about developing this trust in the event that anything happens to any parents or caregivers throughout the individual's life as they approach 18. These are going to be two huge features that are going to support a long-term life that will be supported, where they'll have access to finances and security. Also around elementary school, I tell families it's not your job right now to apply or to become an expert, but to start to learn about what would happen as your child or loved one approaches 18. By that, I mean looking into Social Security. Oh, sorry about that. Social Security, understanding guardianship, and then post-secondary school options. When I talk about post-secondary school options, I mean college options for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are many programs at community college levels, as well as at universities like Appalachian State, Western Carolina, UNC Greensboro. Most recently, UNC Chapel Hill now has a summer program. Being aware of these programs, so that way if you need to financially prepare, you are ready, instead of figuring out that this is something that's available to your loved one when they're 21 to 22. And then as you move into middle school is a huge time of change and transition. It's a huge time because hormones are happening. We're moving into new environments and into new schools. So many times individuals will leave elementary school and move into a middle school environment And as individuals go from elementary to high school, typically for individuals who are advocating for more of a inclusive environment where they're going into the general education course with their peers and getting push in or pull out services, that can become harder. And I'm just very transparent with families as it goes to middle and high school because of the way academics are going and the way that the special education services are going to be doled out. So it's important, if it's highly important for you and for your child and it's in their best benefit to be included in the general education population, to continue to advocate for that, but just to be aware that it is going to probably be more difficult. And I know that's not encouraging, but I always want to be transparent and honest with families. A lot of times in the middle school range, there can be some behavioral changes that might seem out of left field, and having a really good therapist or psychologist can also support. During this time of middle school with all of the hormones and behavioral changes going on, it's great to make sure you have a really great team of resources that can support you and your child and your loved one. As you begin in middle school, it's important to also ensure that the teacher is communicating with you about what's going on. So most of the time when we leave elementary school and we come into middle school, there's not as much communication. There's not going to be as much send homes of this is what happened today and daily activities. So if you are not receiving that from your special education teacher or your child's teacher, to advocate for that and to ask and interface what's going on, how are things going, and to get those updates is going to be huge and important. In middle school as well, it's a time that we recommend you advocate continued for inclusion, as mentioned earlier, whether that's an elective or a class based on their strength or recess. It's going to contribute, again, to higher levels of self-advocacy and self-determination skills during this time. And as we are in this phase of middle school, we want to also think specifically about the transition that's going to start to happen at this time. So most individuals, when they start in middle school, they're going to continue and they're going to bring their IEP. You're going to have a transition meeting, leaving elementary school and moving into middle school. And they will essentially be moving the IEP and all of the goals to middle school. Now, oftentimes the middle school teacher will edit or change the goals based on their classroom and based on the individual. One of the most important things that I recommend to every family in elementary and middle school is to ask for a copy of the draft of the IEP before the meeting. I would say about 85 to 90% of special ed teachers are going to already have a draft of goals before the meeting and come into the IEP meeting with that draft. We recommend that you request the draft so that way you can review the goals first to make sure that it is in line with what you're hoping for your child, with their development and academics, and that it makes sense. Unfortunately, sometimes goals for different students can start to look the same. So we really want to make sure that as you're reading your child's IEP or the draft of it, that they are specialized and tailored to them, to their skills and abilities, and to academically where they currently are. At this time, it's important to also begin to consider the transition IEP. So legally, according to IDEA, different states do things differently, but by the age of 16, we need to have the transition IEP in full swing, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But by the age of 14, the individuals need to be receiving transition assessments to kickstart the transition IEP. So the first section of the transition IEP in the first beginning will be at age 14. At age 14, transition assessments need to be given at the school. So what I recommend is when your child is about 13 years of age, for some students, they still might be in middle school or they could be in high school at this time, is to ask the special education teacher, what transition assessments will be given to my child to start their transition IEP? We want to see if the special ed teacher is thinking about it, if they have assessments to give, and if they're ready. So the assessments that we recommend and that should be given are all around different skills like functional skills, activities of daily living, communication and social skills, pre-vocational skills, and interest and preference inventories. They can be simple things such as, if you have a job one day, do you want to work with a lot of people or by yourself? Do you want to work inside or outside? Do you like standing up and walking around all day? Or do you like sitting and working at a desk? It might be information specifically around their communication skills or functional skills. We want to see that these assessments are given because this is the beginning of starting the transition and thinking about long term in the school system. As we think about this, we want to ensure that your child is also being given assessments that are accessible to them. So, this is the most important part. If your child needs assessments that are visual, that have pictures and symbols, and they're being given a written assessment, that's not accessible to them. They're not going to be able to engage. If they need it to be read aloud to them or to watch videos or to have objects, we want to make sure that it is accessible to them. So making sure and talking to the special education teacher about what types of assessment and how your loved one is engaging with the assessments is crucial and huge. Now, when transition assessments begin at the age of 14, they should not stop until the individual graduates. Transition assessments must continue throughout the whole life of the IEP and the whole life of that child in the school system until they are age 21 at the start of the school year. At this time, as well, legally, they should be receiving an invitation to their IEP meeting. So I mentioned earlier with an elementary school that it's helpful if they can come. Legally, they're not obligated to be invited until they are 14. But at 14, there should be an invitation that you receive for your child to attend their own IEP meeting. And at this time as well, we want to start to talk to them and to ask them about high school, meaning the special education teachers, about the tracks that are available to them in high school. For most high schools, they're going to be self-contained setting, the occupational course of study, or push-in or pull-out supports. And so being aware of what's available in your district and in your county is going to be huge and crucial. At home, we want to continue again with the most important part, which is the self-determination, to continue to give your child the ability to make decisions at home when you're out in the community, if you're going to a restaurant, having them choose maybe which restaurant to go to if you give them 3 options, and to model and to communicate again their abilities and their skills. At middle school is also a time of career exploration and career interest. So we want to be talking, you want to be talking to your child about jobs, work that you have, jobs in your family, your neighbor's job. Maybe they go shadow someone for a day, or when they're off for summer, that you bring them into work or you take them to volunteer at a local organization or a nonprofit to give them some experience to explore and start to figure out what am I exactly interested in. At this time as well, we definitely recommend that you give them at least at a minimum 3 to 4 responsibilities in the home environment. This way, they are learning advocacy skills, determination, and independent skills. And I know that it's so easy in a lot of ways to just kind of step in and do something because it might take an individual a little bit longer. But especially if you have a weekend or summer break, or when you have a little bit more space, giving them the space and room to allow them to do things independently is huge and is paramount to gaining those skills longer term. We don't want to get to a place where your loved one is 21 or 22 and we look up and we realize, oh, we've been doing kind of everything for them. They don't have a lot of or any responsibility at home. And now we've got to figure out what to do and how to give them independence. We want to scaffold it appropriately at each age and stage. So that way, by the time they're 22 to 23, they have a wealth of skills that they are able to do. You know that they have the ability to advocate, to ask for questions, ask for help, especially middle school. If you're going to be giving them more responsibilities, maybe it's not just a one-step task, it's 1 to 2 steps or 2 to 3, depending on the skill level and the ability of the individual, obviously making it appropriate to them. And then allowing them to also explore their different interests, to learn what they like, what they don't like. Maybe you talk to them about an extracurricular. Do you want to take a dance class? Do you want to take a music class? What are you interested in? Do you want to go on a hike or go out into nature and take a course with the State Department for agriculture? I had a middle schooler do that one year, actually, which was kind of incredible. But we want them to help understand themselves. Middle school is such a time of self-exploration and understanding who we are. And so we want to make sure that for any of our students, any of our clients, anybody that has a disability or that doesn't have a disability, that they're understanding and exploring themselves at this phase, because it is very, very appropriate. At this time as well, it's also important to help them understand how to build out a goal and plan for themselves. For a lot of individuals, when we work with them later on in their 20s or in their 30s, if this is not a skill, a self determination skill they've built, it's really hard to teach later on. So, I mean, it can absolutely be done, but the earlier we can start it, the better. So, if your child or your loved one wants to join a dance team, and that's a goal they have for themselves, you helping walk through and model, what does that mean? How are we going to get onto the dance team? What do we need to do? We need to practice, maybe take a dance class, watch videos, put it on your schedule, and help them learn how to reach that goal. It could be even as simple as they want to save money for a specific video game, or something technological that would be available these days. If you provide them with any allowance for their chores, maybe helping them plan out, okay, it's going to take you 4 weeks to be able to save for your allowance for this, and helping them and scaffolding it for them and modeling it to show them how to make a plan, how to set a goal, and to support through coaching and engagement the development of that goal and to the continuation so that way they can complete it. Middle school is also a really important time to make sure you've got other resources that are involved in your life, whether that's NCDSA, a social skills group for your loved one or your child, getting them involved in extracurricular outside of school activities. This is also a time where there's a lot of socialization happening for many individuals. And so we want to ensure that your loved ones are being socialized and are developing friendships and relationships and engagements outside of the home and outside of just the people in their classroom at school. And in late middle school, as I mentioned earlier, is when we're going to start with the transition IEP. Now, the transition IEP will really fully kick in when an individual is 16 years of age. And the transition IEP revolves around these three main domains long term, which is education, employment, and independent living. So when we are thinking about transition skills and a transition IEP, we want to consider how the school is going to support and develop an individual to have the skills to maybe go to a post-secondary educational opportunity, to have a job and be employed, to live either independently or semi-independently, or just be involved in their local community in any ways. At this time, it's super important to really make sure that the plan is person-centered, that we are identifying individual strengths, needs, and that the IEP and the home language you're using is aligning with all of those things. So with the transition assessments in particular, they should be given throughout the year. The transition assessments could be observations, formal or informal assessments, strengths and areas of weaknesses, interest and preference inventories. And the transition assessments should really guide the development of the goals and the objectives moving forward. With the transition assessments in particular, we also want to make sure that they are age appropriate and skill level appropriate, and that they are ongoing and they're from multiple sources. So we want to make sure that if they're seeing a speech and language pathologist, if they're going to see an OT as well, that they are also involved and it's not just from one source. As the individual gets older as well, it's very normal, and parents and loved one caregivers, guardians should be polled for questionnaires from the educator, because that also is going to have an impact into the school day and into the IEP. The transition assessment questions should really be around these three main questions: is where is the individual presently? Where are their skills and abilities lie? Where is this individual going? Where do they want to go? And how are we going to get the individual there? And the transition assessments are going to help us illuminate these three questions. And as we move through these questions and as we start the transition IEP, then we make our way into high school. So high school is a critical age range for transition skill development. This is really where a lot of the foundations that we've laid within giving voice and choice, teaching autonomy, helping set goals, starting this IEP development, taking the transition assessments, talking about career awareness and exploration, what's going on, what are your hopes and dreams, what do you like, what you don't like. This is really when it all starts to solidify and where we should really begin to see forward momentum. So high school is critical for several things. The first really is critical for exposure to jobs. So most special education classrooms and programs should incorporate what's called works-based learning. So works-based learning is the ability to work and have your skill developed at a job site, or at a semi-job site at a school or in a school environment. So sometimes it's not available based on the school or the educator or the busing system. And if this is not something accessible to your child, we help a lot of our clients set up volunteer opportunities or summer internships or a Saturday morning part-time job, because it's incredibly important to their development to generalize work skills outside of just the special education classroom and home. So the special ed teacher should be working on functional academics and functional work skills. But if we never translate that outside of the classroom, it can be sometimes hard to generalize a skill once school is over. So we want them to really be able to understand their strengths and abilities and preferences and what they like. But how are they going to be aware of what jobs they like or they don't like, or what skills they're good at or not good at, if they're not exposed to it? Which is why works-based learning and volunteer opportunities are crucial. So we recommend in high school, we should at least be exposing individuals at a minimum to 3 to 5 job or volunteer opportunities, whether that's, again, through the school system or visiting mom at work or aunt or a neighbor at their job. In high school as well, it's important for them to be able to identify strengths and interests that relate to jobs, whether that is, oh, I'm really good at problem solving, or I'm really great at following a schedule. Oh, I'm super good at money math and I would be a really great cashier. I always give people the exact change. I'm very detail oriented or focused. Maybe it's they have a great people skills and they make people feel welcome. Maybe you love interacting with people and you want to be a receptionist or be at the front desk, to just start to help them identify what their strengths are, and then pairing that with different types of work and jobs is super helpful and crucial at this time. And then we really want to make sure in the IEP, again, that the 3 transition goals and domains are being allocated. So within the transition IEP, by 16, we are going to be engaging with what we call indicator 13, which some of you may have never heard of this. Indicator 13 really is the principle that at 16, the IEP must include appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are updated each year based on age-appropriate transition assessments and data. So these goals shouldn't just be based on nothing. We should have data to back up why we are creating these goals. As well as we're not just creating goals through assessments, but we're developing and engaging with transition services, what courses of study are going to be engaged, and that the individual will reasonably meet those post-secondary goals. And then every other IEP goal should come back to and relate to the 3 main goals, which we'll get into in just a second. This is an indicator 13 checklist. So if your child or loved one is in high school, you can feel free, if you're on a phone or a computer, to screenshot this. These 8 questions are the checklist to see, is my child's transition IEP up to fidelity? The first is there appropriate measurable post-secondary goals in the area of education, employment, and independent living? Are they updated every year? They should not be the same. By the time your child is 16, maybe the goal is Emma will have a job in an area of interest at 14. But by the time Emma is 21, we should be very specific with the type of work, type of role, and potentially where it should be. We should be absolutely specific and getting more specific over a period of time. The third is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on transition assessments? So are they based on something, or is the teacher just creating a goal? What is this based on? The fourth question is, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goal? So transition services in the IEP are going to look like works-based learning. They might specifically look like working in the school environment. A transition service for some counties and districts might look like connecting with vocational rehabilitation and connecting with a counselor and having them go out into the community. The fifth question is, do the transition services include courses of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet their goals? So if a student is in the OCS program, which stands for Occupational Course of Study, does the services that are provided help them meet their goals of working and having a job by the time they graduate? The sixth is, are there annual IEP goals that are related to the transition needs of the student? So, as an example, the IEP, when we are 16 plus, I want you to think about the three transition goals that we are going to talk mainly about, that are these post secondary goals. Oh, sorry. I meant to go back to here. For independent living, employment, and post secondary education. We want these three goals to be the foundation for every other goal in the IEP. So, what I mean by that is, if the goal for the individual is for them to live independently in their own apartment and to go purchase their own groceries, we want to make sure that we don't have a math goal that's about doing division by hand, because that is not functional. A functional math goal that's going to relate back to an individual buying their own groceries will be a goal around Jill will, with using a calculator, add the total of 15 different grocery items and see if she has enough money based on a total that she's been given. So we want every goal in the IEP to relate back to these three goals. We don't want outlier goals that are there for no reason and that are filler. The IEP, when we get to the age 16, should be very specifically related to transition and long-term life. And at this point in time, it should be very functional. So everything we're doing 16 plus really needs to be about, what is this person going to do when they are an adult? We want to be preparing them for adulthood. I mentioned earlier when I had a student that had the handwriting goal when he was still 16, when he came to me and came to my classroom. That was no longer functional for him. But when he came into my classroom, I got him using a computer and texting, and he was then able to fill out a job application, communicate with his mom. Handwriting was hard for a variety of reasons. And so we want to make sure that they're functional and that they all relate, again, to these three goals. Now, in high school, how you can help your child or loved one is to provide specific feedback based on their strengths and weaknesses. Now, this is a time where we want to be honest and help individuals understand that we all have strengths and we all have things that we need to work on. And in our line of work, we like to use, instead of the words weaknesses, we call them areas of construction, things that we're going to work on. We want to encourage self-assessment for individuals in high school to think about, oh, maybe they said something to a friend. It could be even social, and their friend got upset with them. Hey, let's have a conversation. Why did that happen? Why do you think they got upset? What do you think happened? And having them start to self-assess situations, whether it be social or academic or with family or just random things around the home. It could even be a TV show that they like. Encouraging self-assessment is critical at this phase for transition. We also want to openly be talking about their likes, dislikes, and preferences. And we want to make sure that, again, transition assessments are being used and that we're giving specific feedback to them on their strengths and achievements. And one thing that's really important is giving what we call like behavior specific praise. So calling out exactly what they've done well instead of just saying, great job. Oh, that was a really awesome job how you did that math problem. You got the right answer and you worked really hard. Or if you're at the grocery store and you let them check off the items on the list. Oh my gosh, I really appreciate how you looked at the list and you got every single item. That was amazing. I really appreciate that. We want to be very specific and emphasize actions and behaviors that are going to lead to success. Now, within the school system as well, we want to ensure that, again, the transition assessments are being given throughout the year because we want to know how they're developing, whether that be socially, communication wise, functional, and vocational skills. And we want to make sure that your child is involved within their IEP process or your loved one. One of my favorite things to do for high schoolers and middle schoolers is to talk to the special ed teacher about having them come to the meeting and present their present levels of academic and functional performance, whether that be through a slideshow or talking about it or presenting work samples, so that way they are engaged. And then also having them sit at the table and potentially even talk about their IEP goals, if that's developmentally appropriate for the individual, giving them two choices of, hey, here's two goals. Which goal would you like to do? And maybe they're similar and they're worded a little bit differently, or there's different specificities around money math or budgeting. but we want them to be engaged and feel like they have autonomy and say in their education, because as they move forward from education, they're going to need to have autonomy and say in their employment. And education is the closest thing that we have to what's going to be somewhat like an employment as individuals get older. And so we want to be able to model that in high school while they are there. And this really is for transition, we want our services flow chart to look like in the school system. And so this is for you to be able to know how to advocate for your loved one. We want to make sure that we start and begin again with these age appropriate transition assessments where we're analyzing interests, strengths, preferences, and needs. That the individuals are by 16 given measurable post-secondary goals around education and training, employment, independent living, and that transition services are being developed and engaged in the school system. And whether that is community-based learning, works-based learning, going out into the community, actively engage with vocational rehabilitation or other Medicaid service providers, that they have the correct course of study, whether that's extended content standards, self-contained classroom, OCS, and that way you know and they know exactly what to expect, whether it's a diploma or non-diploma track. As well as we want to be coordinating with adult agency services at this time. And I'm going to talk about that briefly in just a moment because not all districts have contracts with adult agencies. Unfortunately, that's something that's not legally mandatory. And then we also want to ensure within the transition services that the annual IEP goals are all buffering and supporting these post-secondary goals based on the transition assessments that are being given to an individual. When we are thinking about transition goals, we want to make sure that you can have access to the assessments that were used, the results. So what I typically say is I would always, when I was a special ed teacher, bring the transition assessments to the IEP meeting to show to the families and show to the parents or send home beforehand, because we want to see where we're getting data from and where families and individuals are, special ed teachers are coming from when they're developing their drafts. So you have it in your full right to ask for the transition assessments and to see them to make sure that they are age appropriate and that they're being used appropriately to develop these transition goals as needed. Similarly, we want to make sure when we are thinking about transition goals, we're remembering that if any goal area is not needed, the present levels are documenting why. So if we don't need a goal around math for whatever reason, we're documenting why we don't need a goal. Why would that not be appropriate? We're not going to be leaving things out when it comes to high school. I've seen some high school IEPs that have 3 goals, one around communication, social, one around reading, and one around math, and we're leaving out so much there. And so if anything is going to be left out, we have to figure out why. We also want to remember to address goals that appear to be unrealistic with additional assessments and data. So sometimes the special ed teacher might throw in a goal around work or engagement that is unrealistic. We want to make sure that any transition IEP goal that is written is realistic and is supported by the data. And we want to make sure as we are going through this support provider that we know the 4 main things we need to focus on in the school system to benefit the transition IEP. The first is engaging academic performance. The second is self-determination, which we've talked a lot about already. The third is understanding career interests and skills and preferences. And the fourth is adaptive behavior and independent living. So in the IEP, we want to make sure that academics, functional academics specifically, are being emphasized. Self-determination skills and goals are being emphasized, assessments and engagements around career interests, and goals around adaptive behavior and independent living. One thing that happened in the last couple of years to me that was quite flabbergasting to me as a former special ed teacher with a master's in special ed and in transition is I went into a school for a high school student, and we were talking about the importance of specific independent living and functional skills in the IEP. And he really wanted to be able to heat his own lunch up and to cook his own meals at home in the microwave and at school. And when we brought this up to the IEP team as a potential goal, they told us that they were not able to do functional goals on the IEP. That is incorrect and that is illegal. Um, all goals in the IEP are going to be around not only academics, but also adaptive living, independent living, and functional skills and goals. So please know, no matter your child's age or your loved one's age, that functional skills and functional goals must be included in the IEP at this time. At this time as well, you're going to make sure that there are transition services and activities slated into their IEP. And so specifically with transition services, this is going to look like how are they going to engage within gaining functional skills for post-school life. So a transition service might be just that the teacher is instructing them on how to develop a budget. It could be a related service like speech or occupational therapy is coming in. It could be a community experience like work-based learning or a functional vocational evaluation through vocational rehabilitation. But for every transition goal and every transition outline that we're doing in the IEP, you need to know how is that going to be taught to your child or your loved one, which that's where the transition services come into play. So if you have a goal specifically around engaging with post-secondary options, then there needs to be a transition service that is talking about how your teacher is going to teach and instruct and tell your loved one about the different post-secondary options that are available to them. Or if there's a goal around connecting with vocational rehabilitation, you need to make sure that vocational rehabilitation is in the IEP and that there's a transition service that they're going to be engaged as a related service professional. So some examples of transition services are just instruction, teaching academics, work-related skills, related service, OT, PT, community experience like work-based learning, employment or post-secondary objectives like financial planning, healthcare, advocacy, self-determination. And oftentimes families don't realize these are things they can advocate for in the school system, but they're highly, highly important because they are transition services and they legally are to be obligated to your loved one. Now, as you move through high school, in the house and in your home, wherever your loved one is, it's important to start to review at this time post-secondary options that are available to them. To start to think about, do you want to go to college? Do you want to go take some training classes at Wake Tech or Durham Tech? Are you interested in the program, the University Participant Program at Western Carolina? And to think about what's available to them and accessible and to start to actually visit and engage with those programs. And we want to make sure as we get later and later into high school that all goals on the IEP are functional. Again, we're not trying to add double digits on paper. We need to use a calculator because everyone in reality walks around with their smartphone, and when they're at the store, I'm sure you do this all the time, you're adding on your calculator. So we want to make sure that everything specifically is functional and that the transition services and the IEP are appropriate and informed based on the assessments and individual skills. At this time at home, they really need to be having at least more than 4 to 6 responsibilities every day where there is autonomy and responsibility and not as much check-in. Obviously, it's going to depend on the individual, how we're scaffolding, but we want to make sure that they're responsible for things like choosing their clothes for the day, making their bed, making their lunch, or just packing their lunch together, getting the mail, taking the trash out once a week. And giving them the support, right, that's needed is going to be important. And as we think about developing skills and transition skills and goals, one of the most important things I tell to every family and to parents is we want to make sure there's success before we take away any scaffolded support. So as an example, let's say that your loved one is already able to, they choose their clothes every morning and they make their bed, but you would like them to make their lunch, right? We want to make sure that for the first couple weeks, you're doing it with them. They're feeling comfortable and confident. And then maybe you step back and you just coach verbally and you give verbal coaching. Hey, make sure you put the sandwich down first, and yep, put the turkey there. That looks great. You're giving verbal coaching, and then you're going to step off. Maybe you give them a visual to complete and to make their sandwich. We want to slowly scaffold and take away support until they are doing it independently. But we don't want to take it away too soon. We want to take it away once they have success and there is confidence built in them. Um, we want to make sure that as they are developing skills, that we are able to call out again the skills that they have and communicate how they're doing, so that way they are able to feel confident and engage within themselves. At high school at this time, especially when they reach about 16 to 17, we want to begin to think and talk about guardianship. So I'm going to just do in the next 5 minutes some really quick information resources. You can feel free to screenshot these pages as well. But around 16 to 18, we want to start to talk and think about guardianship as well as the guardianship continuum. That guardianship is not meant ever to do harm, but to protect an individual. But it's also important to know that there is not just the option of guardianship. So when an individual becomes 18, you can have power of attorney and they are still able to be their own legal guardian. Now, no matter if you have different types of guardianship, even if you have guardianship, individuals will always still retain their right to vote. But there are different ways of thinking about guardianship, and they go from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. So before we even get to guardianship, we have what we call supported decision making and power of attorney. Supported decision making isn't a legally recognized way of making decisions in North Carolina. It is in some states, but it's not here in NC. So the first step we would have really is just power of attorney, where you could have power of attorney over healthcare and finances in the event that an individual needs help or support. And then when we think about guardianship, we go from least to most restrictive by looking at guardianship from interim, which means you only step into guardianship for about a 6 month period to a year. Then we have limited guardianship, which means you have guardianship over very specific aspects of an individual's life, whether that is financial management, healthcare, or living decisions. Then we move to the guardianship of the estate, which most people aren't given because most 18-year-olds don't have an estate or many assets in their name. And then we move to guardianship of the person, which is about their day-to-day lives and their day-to-day engagements, making decisions, living, eating, etc. And then general guardianship is where you have full guardianship of the person. So according to our court systems, guardianship is the legal relationship between a guardian and a ward. And to have guardianship, you need to be able to prove to a court system, to a clerk of court, and to a guardian ad litem that an individual is not able to make specific important decisions for themselves and could be at risk for being vulnerable. So when I think about guardianship, I think about it as a way of making sure it's best for the individual. Not every person needs guardianship. I have so many clients who just have power of attorney and they make all the other decisions for themselves. But if your loved one is going to potentially be taken advantage of financially, if they meet a really awesome friend and they give all their money away, or if there's a medical emergency and they can make a decision to reject important medical treatment, those are things to be able to consider. We recommend connecting with a competent attorney around the individuals turning 16 to 17, and you can start to apply and engage within guardianship paperwork when the individual is around 17 years old and 6 months. At this time as well in high school, it's important to start thinking about benefits. The first being supplemental security income, which at 18 individuals with disabilities are eligible for based on their disability and based on their lack of income. So those are the two qualifying factors for an individual. So social supplemental security income will allow an individual to access a monthly stipend from the federal government, as well as it will allow them to access Medicaid health care, which is very important for individuals who post 26, after you're no longer able to be on parent or caregiver's health insurance anymore, to be able to access health insurance long term if they're not able to work a job that's going to give them access, to healthcare and health insurance. So supplemental security income is just a monthly stipend, and you are tested, as I mentioned earlier, based on disability and based on finances and money. So if you have a loved one who's 13 and you feel like, yes, they're going to need Medicaid and SSI long term, it's important to know that Social Security gives limits to how much individuals can have access to. So they call it a resource limit, but that can be hard for some people. So we also refer to it as an asset limit. If your loved one has currently, it's set every year in January, the current asset limit is $2,000. So if your loved one has more than $2,000 in a bank account with their name on it, they would be ineligible for accessing supplemental security income, because that's the limit that they put on someone accessing funds in a private in a traditional bank account. Similarly, for individuals receiving SSI, there's also an income limit. So they are limited by how much money they can make each month at a job. And I believe this year that's about $1,510. You can apply for SSI when your child is around 17 years of age and 8 months. So it's important right now, if you have assets or a bank account in your child's name, that you remember we've got to keep it under $2,000, because that's something that Social Security is going to take pretty seriously. With Social Security as well, it's important to know that if you retire, that your child's SSI could potentially change. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions about that. But due to the nature of supplemental security income, it's important to have an ABLE account and the special needs trust. So these are financial benefits. So the special needs trust is a trust that you can have an infinite amount of money in this trust, and all of the assets in the trust are deemed unavailable or inaccessible to Social Security. So they are not going to be able to means test an individual based on, let's say you have $10,000 in a trust, they're still going to be able to receive their SSI because of the way that its special needs trust is written. Special needs trust can be funded through life insurance policies. Any number of people can give funds to a special needs trust, and we recommend that you connect with a competent attorney to develop a trust. Similarly, the ABLE account is another way for an individual to have more than $2,000. The ABLE account is a tax advantage savings account. It stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. It is for adults with disabilities who access SSI, but who want to have more than $2,000 in a bank account. So the ABLE account protects the benefits, but the maximum amount of money you can ever have in an ABLE account is $100,000. And upon the death of the person whose ABLE account is name it is, any funds would go back to Social Security. That's just how the advocates were able to write it into law for Social Security to be able to access this. So making sure we've got those things in place in terms of benefits and finances is crucial and huge. And the last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to go back right here to our benefits. If no matter your child's age, please make sure that if you're not on the Innovations Waiver waitlist today, that you do that. You contact your MCO, your managed care organization. The Innovations Waiver pays for direct support professionals to engage with your loved one in the community, to come into the home, pays for long-term job coaching, and most housing opportunities you have to have the Innovations Waiver to be eligible for certain homes for individuals. So it's important for this long-term benefit of your loved one to have the Innovations Waiver because it's going to come down to so many things. It's also important that at high school age, you start to connect with vocational rehabilitation, which is a federal government program to help individuals with disabilities access employment and reduce barriers to employment through creating an employment program plan and providing job coach services. And they do that through different Medicaid agencies and organizations. So those are all things that are super, super important to think about as we begin to kind of consider and move through transition. What I like to say at the end of every session when I talk to families is to think about what age and phase and stage is your loved one at. If they're in elementary school, maybe you want to walk away from this thinking, okay, I need to make sure I'm on the Innovations Waiver wait list, and I need the resource of the Special Needs Trust. So I need to get a recommendation for an attorney. Or maybe they're in elementary school and you've not really thought about if they are going to be engaged with their peers and their classmates in general education for inclusion programs. Maybe you want to focus on that. Maybe your loved one is 14 and they have an IEP and you've never asked about the transition assessments. Think about what would be important there. I'm also happy, as Betsy John mentioned earlier, to answer any questions post tonight and to give you any further feedback. So typically what I'll do is I'll share this presentation with NCDSA, and they will send it out to you all for you to review and to have in your back pocket. Wherever you find yourself or you find your loved one, please know that you are not alone. There are resources and supports and agencies and organizations out there. I know I gave a lot of information tonight. Preparing for transition can be a lot. It unfortunately is a lot. And so, Able Transition, we're here to support you. So is NCDSA. So please make sure at the end of the day that you figure out how to care for yourself, how to engage. And if you would at all like to engage or talk with me, I'm happy to do so. We offer free 45-minute calls with families who want to learn more about transition planning and what we do. I wasn't here tonight to talk really about any of that, but just letting you know that we also would definitely have that door open. But if you have any questions, please make sure you get that to the NCDSA team. Otherwise, that's all for me tonight. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cheryl. Of course.
What?
Let's see. Can you all hear me? So sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? I think we are all great. We just want to thank you again, Kenzie, for being with us tonight. What an amazing, amazing presentation. And as she spoke, this is her area of expertise, and she is just sharing that wealth of knowledge with us. We will have this recording for all of our amazing families as touch points for you to go back to, because as we know, this is a wealth of information to take in. And any other follow-up questions I'll send to you as well, Kenzie, just as we can create that FAQ as all of our families are going through these different transitions. And please, families, reach out to us at NCDSA. You can reach out to me specifically, family support at ncdsalliance.org, or even just go on our website. If you have any specific follow-up questions, send those out. We are here to support you, to get you those answers, and to get you to those resources. Thank you for your time with us tonight. And I hope you all have a great Wednesday. Thanks again so much, Kenzie, for your amazingness.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.